Sun writes that the trusted face of the BBC, Huw Edwards, has admitted to making indecent images of children. "I'm guilty" is the simple headline on the Daily Express. The Times also leads on Huw Edwards' guilty plea and adds that the former newsreader exchanged WhatsApp messages with a man later convicted on paedophilia charges. Meanwhile, the Daily Telegraph reports that the BBC is now facing questions after it emerged that they paid Huw Edwards more than £200,000 after he was arrested. The Eye adds that the Culture Secretary is expected to call in the BBC's Director General for urgent talks in the wake of the scandal. The Metro has the one-word headline, outrage, responding to the riots in Southport, which were fueled by misinformation about the suspect in the stabbing attack there. The Daily Mail reports that some of the misinformation which caused the riot in Southport came from a Russian-linked fake news website. The Financial Times, meanwhile, reports that Iran has insisted it will retaliate against Israel for killing the Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. The Guardian's front page also leads on the story and says fears of escalation are now growing after the airstrikes. And the Daily Star leads on the news that holidaymakers could face travel chaos with roadworks planned across hundreds of miles. And the reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Alex Andreou and Annabel Denham. Thank you both so much for being with us. Lots of stories and lots of important stories, but one that very much is sort of featuring in most of the papers. Let's start with the Sun front page. One simple word, guilty. And it says, the trusted face of the BBC, and that's Huw Edwards, pleading guilty to the charges of making the photographs and pictures. Just to point out that legally that means that he sort of had possession, physical or digital, of those images. What do you make of it?
Well, it's very shocking indeed, isn't it? And a very striking front page from The Sun there, unequivocal with its headline, simply the word guilty. Huw Edwards, who hasn't been seen in public for a year, and now that we do see him, he's surrounded by police officers, by people on their smartphones, possibly by some of his former colleagues, but he was suspended last July from the corporation. He was arrested in November and today has pleaded guilty. And, the word in some ways actually that jumps out at me on the cover of The Sun is trusted. I think that's what's so shocking about this, is that Huw Edwards was somebody that we in some ways allowed into our homes, who was on our television screens
he
on a
announced
daily
the Queen's
basis.
death. I mean, when it comes to trust.
He was there for, of course, Prince Philip's funeral, all of these seminal moments in our recent national history. Huw Edwards has been a very present force, and now his career and his reputation are in tatters, and it's impossible to really see a route for him back from this. How can he possibly restore his career? But the details of this are, really quite shocking. Over 370 images that he possessed, 41 of which involved children. And I think on that note that whilst so much of the attention is on Huw Edwards himself, and it will undoubtedly have been an ordeal for him, and there will be many people, I think, in Britain who have some sympathy, while unequivocally condemning, of course, his actions. But ultimately, this is a story about child sexual abuse, which is a terrible problem that we have in Britain today and in British society. And indeed, some of Huw Edwards' former colleagues have pointed this out and really tried to stress.
Alex, before coming to you, let me just take a look at the front page of the Daily Telegraph, because it kind of widens the story. So, front page of the Daily Telegraph, kind of, asking the question what the BBC knew and when. So, BBC paid Edwards £200,000 after the arrest. Alex, your reaction?
I think, I'm with Annabel completely, that the focus needs to stay on the victims of this, because I think it's very easy when a story involves someone so well known to sort of focus on that person, to zero in on that person and forget that there is another side to this. And the other side to this is the child abuse that goes on. On the wider story, I mean, I think the BBC are relatively justified to say that the line at which we would sack someone such a public figure would be at the point where they were charged. And he had already resigned when he was charged, so they couldn't do that. Because I think to be sacked by the BBC when you're in a situation where an accusation has been made would almost seem like an admission by the corporation that we think the person is guilty. And so charge seems to me about the right balance, but I know you disagree.
Briefly, if you can.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think that it will depend on the contract that he would have had with the BBC. Certainly, there may have been an argument that the reputational damage to the corporation was such they would have no choice but to cut him loose. On the other hand, I imagine they were under pressure from their HR team to retain him. There would have been concerns about his mental health. We know that he's had the breakdown of his marriage. He's talked about issues with depression, suffering from depression in the past, but nonetheless, to the cover of the Telegraph, it is extraordinary to read that the BBC paid him £200,000 after the arrest, and it's the licence fee payers who are footing the bill, and I think that they will understandably want some pretty basic questions asked about what the BBC knew and when.
Let's move on now to, of course, one of the day's other main stories, and that is the events in Southport, the horrific attack on Monday. But then, as the Metro says, the outrage at what we saw yesterday evening. Let me also pull up the Daily Mail, which says Russia linked to fake news that sparked the mosque riot. Alex, we saw those riots, and of course the big question now is the disinformation that led to those happening.
Yeah, and I genuinely think we need to jump on this. There are people who say it's not caught by any particular legislation. I'm not entirely sure. I think there are parts of SOCA 2005 about harassment that widen the definition of harassment to include harassing a group of people that could actually apply here. I think, you know, in this day and age, it's actually quite easy to find an electronic footprint of how the story first began to circulate. It's very easy to identify the accounts, the big accounts that first amplified it. And I mean, shouting fire in a crowded theatre, even in America, where you have the most protected version of the freedom of speech in the form of the First Amendment in the Constitution, there are limits. And creating a situation where you have a reasonable expectation that there might be violence, I think falls within those limits. It seems to me that leadership is often baffled by the fact that this is online. They go, this is online. I don't know, what do we do? This is online. The same rules should apply that apply to anyone else that decides to print pamphlets and say that you or I have done something we haven't done.
Let's just look at the front page of the Times to explore a different angle. And this is Farage denies whipping up street riots in Southport. He says he was asking very legitimate questions because there's the issue of anonymous accounts online. They can say whatever they want from wherever. It's a different issue of someone who is now an MP who was being heavily criticised. Briefly, if you can.
Yes, Nigel Farage has come under fire in the last 24 hours for a video that he posted on social media, which called into question whether we're being told the truth about who committed this absolutely awful crime. And no wonder this girl's mother is outraged, because all of the focus now is on the violence that we've seen since the terrible murders, rather than, you know, on the grief that they must be feeling. And there ought to be an outpouring of national sympathy for them, rather than this violence that we're seeing on the streets. But nonetheless, Nigel Farage has been accused of spreading misinformation, or at least encouraging people to question the information that they have been given. Of course, you know, the Daily Mail suggesting that Russia has been linked to some of the fake news that was spread online. And, you know, no wonder if you've got politicians calling this into question. And I suspect that Nigel Farage, and indeed some members of the Labour Party, are so used to being in opposition, or indeed not even being MPs, that they've perhaps lost sight of the responsibility that they have, the role that they have to the British public.
Annabelle, Alex, stay with us. Coming up, could the killings of Hezbollah and Hamas leaders bring about wider conflict in the Middle East? We'll be discussing that next.
riots, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that is the boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms, I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, Alex Andreou and Annabelle Denham. Okay, well, let's go straight now to a story that's also getting a lot of coverage in the papers, and rightly so. And that is Iran vows revenge on Israel for killing of Hamas political leader in Tehran. This is the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, one of the key figures within Hamas, and crucially killed in Tehran. Annabelle.
Yes, that's right. This is the fallout, really, from the assassination, not just of Haniyeh, but also of Fuad Shakur, who is a senior member of Hezbollah, believed by the Israeli government to have been responsible for that terrible attack in Golan Heights, in which children were killed. But yes, I think the fact that he was in Tehran for the swearing-in ceremony of the new president makes it extremely difficult for Iran to maintain the pretense that it isn't the running the show, that it isn't Iran's proxies which are causing such violence and conflict in the region. I think it really speaks to the scale of the challenge facing Israel. Look at how many fronts it is now having to fight on, and presents a real challenge for the West in terms of its, if Iran is now going to be drawn into some sort of direct conflict, how is the West going to respond. I'm not fully sure that it has answers to those questions at the moment. There's a lot of talk simply about the fears of escalation. Could this spill over into a full-blown war in the Middle East?
Alex, forgive me, just the front page of The Guardian, which asks, the very point that you made, fears of escalation after Israel kills leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah. I mean, we're almost losing track of what is in retaliation to what right now.
And what's important is not only that there is a risk of escalation, but that we've also moved very far away suddenly from finding any negotiated settlement, because Ismail Haniyeh was the lead negotiator for Hamas, and he was based in Qatar, who are the main sort of mediating country in the negotiations for a ceasefire, and have condemned his killing. So, I mean, there is a view, it may be seen as cynical, but there is a view that Netanyahu, every such strike makes Netanyahu's position just a tiny bit more tenable after this ends politically, and so that he will not declare mission over until he feels he's in a position where maybe he can survive politically, which last year we all thought was impossible, right? We thought that the security lapse that led to the October 7th massacre was so incredible and so severe that Netanyahu could never survive that. And here we are a year later, and he's beginning to rebuild his reputation as the sort of protector-in-chief of Israel.
Certainly a very tense situation right now. Alex Andreu, Annabel Denham, thank you both so much for